Hello, students. Welcome to Byju's IAS. Welcome to a session on economy this week, wherein we'll be taking some of the very important articles related to Indian economy, and we'll be discussing these particular articles. For this particular video, I've chosen the time period from 23rd March to 5th of April 2020, and the articles that I've chosen are from Hindu, Indian Express, Business Standard, Live Mint, and Business Line. Let's begin the discussion. The first article is related to Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code. Just to give you certain important points or background points, please understand this. In case of the Indian economy, creditors or lenders. There are multiple types of creditors. I'll focus on a lender such as a financial institution, that is a bank. Bank will give loans to multiple types of borrowers in the market. These two borrowers are basically divided into the corporate borrowers as well as retail borrowers. Now, if a corporate borrower, let's say company ABC, takes a loan, defaults on the loan. That is basically he will take a loan. He's supposed to make a repayment to the bank. He doesn't make the repayment. He defaults on the repayment. In such cases, the bank, let's say XYZ, will file a case against this particular company under NCLT, National Company Law Tribunal. And in case of the bank giving a loan to retail borrowers means all of us, individual borrowers who will take a loan and default on this particular repayment of the loan. In such cases, bank will file the cases at DRT, Debt Recovery Tribunal. Now, the basic process of recovering this particular loan is called as insolvency resolution. I'll focus this most importantly related to companies because that is more important for the banks. So the banks have given loan to companies. Companies do not repay the loan. Now the banks will basically take this particular company or drag the company to NCLT and file a case. And the insolvency resolution process will be conducted under the concept called as Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code. It has been more than 3 years since the implementation of Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code. Very recently, Government of India has made a change or has amended the code in order to ensure that some of the companies which are incurring losses because of the pandemic, because of the lockdown, because of the economic disruption that has been caused, will not be dragged to NCLT and they will end up losing the ownership of the company. That is basically earlier for the bank to trigger the insolvency and bankruptcy code. That is the bank to basically drag the company to NCLT. The default that was limited or the threshold default should be 1 lakh rupees. Now this particular threshold for the default has been increased to 1 crore rupees. This has been done in order to protect these particular companies because as we have seen that with the onset of the pandemic, the economic activity has got disrupted. Many of the companies which were generating some revenues at least, their revenues have dried up. Many of the exporting companies also their revenues have dried up. Their orders have been cancelled. The domestic companies are facing a lot of issue with respect to supply of goods and services in the domestic market. So in this particular situation, it is natural that these particular companies' revenues will be very, very low. And in majority of the cases, these particular companies may also end up incurring losses. And when they end up incurring losses, obviously the bank which is expecting a return, that is in the form of equated monthly installment or the repayment of the loans, will not receive this particular repayment. And when the company doesn't make the repayment, bank will first classify this particular loan account as non-performing asset, then will drag the company to NCLT and start the insolvency resolution process under Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code. And because of a certain event, that is economic disruption that has been caused, these particular companies or the owners or the promoters of these particular companies will end up losing the ownership of the company. Because usually what happens in case of IBC, I use the term insolvency resolution process. The concept of insolvency resolution process is the creditors or the lenders will end up selling the company to a buyer in a market or else they will liquidate the company. So there is a danger that the promoters or the owners of the company will end up losing the ownership of the company. So in order to ensure that the banks will simply not start dragging these particular companies to NCLT and file cases on them, Government of India has amended the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code and has increased the threshold of the default from 1 lakh rupees to 1 crore rupees. Now, this is one side of the story. This has been done by government to protect the companies. Having said so, this is also expected to have certain unintended consequences. What am I referring to here? There are creditors or lenders to these particular companies, and these particular creditors are usually divided into two: secured creditors, unsecured creditors, or else another kind of a classification is operational creditors and financial creditors. Now, with this particular amendment, some of these particular creditors, especially unsecured creditors or operational creditors, are going to face a certain financial pressures because they have given the loans or have given money to these particular companies in one or the other way. They are expecting the return of their money, but these particular companies will not be able to pay in the natural course or in normal times. When the companies will not be able to pay, these creditors will take the case to NCLT and in one or the other way will get the returns. But now what has been done by Government of India? The threshold has been increased. And the default threshold increase means what? These particular companies cannot be taken, or some of the companies which will fall below this particular threshold level, even if they default, the lenders cannot take them to NCLT. What about their recovery? Don't you think they will also face certain financial pressures? That has been the counterpoint to this particular amendment by Government of India. So this is a basic discussion related to the article. Now, based on the whole concept of IBC, I've given you a descriptive question. How has the IBC, Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code, improved the insolvency resolution landscape in India? You'll have to discuss this in 250 words. Now, please understand, in the last couple of years, this particular reform of Government of India has been one of the central pieces of the reforms taken in order to promote the economic recovery. The most important outcome of the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code has been that the creditors, irrespective of whether they are the financial creditors or, to be more precise, secured creditors or unsecured creditors, have been given the right to drag the companies in case of a default. Now, some of you will have this kind of a doubt as to what is the difference between secured creditors and unsecured creditors. Let me give a very simple example. Imagine a bank will give a loan to a company. X is the bank, C is the company. So bank is giving a loan to a company, and when they give the loan to a company, they will collect a collateral or security. So when such collateral or security is collected, this particular lender becomes a secured creditor. And another financial institution, let's say Y, gives a loan to company, same company, but doesn't collect any kind of a collateral. Such kind of a lender or creditor is called as unsecured creditor. So earlier the issue was that it was very difficult for the unsecured creditors to file a case and get their returns also. And the time period that was taken for insolvency resolution was very, very high. As per one survey that was conducted by Alvarez and Marcel, it was found that the insolvency resolution process in case of India took around 4.3 years. That's a very long time period. And the recovery rates, even after the insolvency resolution process, was very, very low or very, very less. What do you mean by recovery? For 100 rupee loans given, how much money you are getting back? So one, the time period was very, very high. It was very difficult for the unsecured creditors to get their returns. The overall recovery in the process was very, very less. Apart from this, there are other issues also. For example, there are multiple legislative pieces. Different acts were implemented in order to take care of insolvency resolution process for different institutions. There was a SARFAESI, there was a Recovery of a Debt Due to Banks and Financial Institutions Act, there was a Board of Industrial and Financial Reconstruction. Certain provisions were also present under Companies Act. So there were multiple pieces of legislations or multiple sources or multiple routes through which the recovery was done for different institutions. In order to ensure that there's a single piece of legislation or there is single act which will take care of the insolvency resolution of all the types of institutions, Government of India implemented Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code. And Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code has been able to address many of these particular issues. Now, one of the outcomes of the implementation of this particular code has been that the performance of India in the ease of doing business also has improved. And this particular report, which is published annually, has kept on saying that one of the reasons why performance of India has improved is because of the insolvency and bankruptcy code. So the question is asking about all of these particular outcomes which have happened because of the implementation of the code. You will have to write in 250 words. Now the next article, very important article related to FRBM. Although the article initially discusses why Kerala as a state has sought relaxation of FRBM rules, we'll focus our discussion on the importance of FRBM. FRBM basically stands for Fiscal Responsibility and Budget Management Act. I'll repeat it. FRBM stands for Fiscal Responsibility and Budget Management Act. This particular act was implemented by the government in order to implement or introduce the concept of fiscal prudence in the finances of government, and you will come across another term to introduce intergenerational parity or intergenerational equity in the finances of the government. Now, first, what is the meaning of fiscal prudence? Second, what is the meaning of intergenerational equity? Let me start with the fiscal prudence. You will come across two concepts in the newspapers. One, fiscal prudence, and the second one is fiscal profligacy. Fiscal prudence is a positive concept. It basically means that the quality of the expenditure of the government is improving. Government is worried about its finances. And in order to increase its quality of expenditure, government is taking certain measures. For example, government will borrow annually. Government will borrow when they announce or when they present the annual budget. Usually you'll see that in case of the budget, the expenditure is higher than the receipt side or the income side of the budget. And since the expenditure is higher than the receipt side, obviously the government will be forced to borrow from the market. But please understand, what is the reason for the borrowing will differentiate whether the finances of the government are prudent or profligate. For example, Government of India borrows to invest in infrastructure. Government of India borrows to construct, let's say, industrial corridor, to construct national highways, bridges, tunnels, so on and so forth. In simple terms, if the expenditure is focused mainly on the capital side of the budget, then usually we see that this is one type of, again I'm using the term, this is one type of fiscal prudence. Government is worried about its expenditure, or more importantly worried about quality of expenditure. On the other hand, if Government of India borrows, let's say for announcement of a new welfare schemes, new subsidy schemes, because of various other revenue expenditures, these kind of borrowings we usually consider to be fiscally profligate. For example, various state governments in the recent times have announced loan waivers, and to announce loan waivers, these particular states have borrowed from the market. And please understand, these particular loan waivers are not part of the capital head, rather they will fall under the revenue head or revenue expenditure. Now, what is the basic difference between the capital and the revenue? If you do not understand the difference, please follow this very carefully. Capital expenditure is usually associated with asset creation, whereas revenue expenditure is one-sided expenditure. It will flow into the system. Government cannot expect any kind of returns from the system under this particular head. So please understand, whenever government incurs expenditure under capital head, in the future, you can expect a certain returns for the government. For example, government will develop, let's say, an industrial corridor. Don't you think this particular industrial corridor can be used for better transportation? And if the transportation improves, cost of transportation, time of transportation is expected to come down. The market prices of the goods are expected to come down. So your products in the market will become much more competitive. In addition to this, when you construct an industrial corridor, don't you think you'll start demanding for raw material, labor, so on and so forth? So employment will get generated, and the demand for raw materials will also create certain business for the vendors or the suppliers of these particular raw materials. So all these are the expected outcomes whenever there's an investment under the capital head, whereas under the revenue head, these kind of outcomes are not expected. So basically we say that expenditure of government or the quality of expenditure of the government should be very high. That will basically be ensured when you read the term government is becoming more fiscally prudent. On the other hand, I use the term intergenerational equity. What do you mean by intergenerational equity? It basically means the borrowings of the present should not affect the expenditures of future generations. I'll repeat the statement. The borrowings of the present should not have an impact on the expenditures of future generations. Let me give a very simple example. Imagine today government will borrow heavily from the market. And when they borrow heavily from the market, obviously let's say after 5 years or after 10 years, there's a repayment liability. That is basically government of India has borrowed today. It has to repay the amount, let's say after 5 years. And when the time of payment comes after 5 years, don't you think that will have an impact on the expenditure that could be incurred after 5 years? So the borrowings of the present generation should not affect the expenditures of the future generation. That is a concept of intergenerational equity. So to ensure the fiscal prudence as well as intergenerational equity, we introduce the concept of FRBM, Fiscal Responsibility Budget Management Act of 2003. Under this particular FRBM, the most important points are: one, revenue deficit would be brought down to 0%, fiscal deficit will be brought down to 3% by 2008-2009. Revenue deficit will be brought down to 0% and fiscal deficit will be brought down to 3%. What is the meaning of this? If the revenue deficit is 0%, it means the revenue expenditure of the government is equal to revenue receipts. And if a fiscal deficit is 3% of GDP, it means government of India has borrowed. Borrowed for what purposes? Not for bridging the revenue deficit, but for investment purposes. Or in simple terms, it has borrowed to invest under the capital head. Is it okay? So you are allowed to borrow. Nothing wrong with borrowing. But the only difference is, are you borrowing from the market for revenue expenditure or for capital expenditure? That will make a difference. So under FRBM, government was allowed to borrow from the market. Nothing wrong with borrowing, but the borrowing has to be brought down to 3% of GDP. That is, the fiscal deficit is equal to 3% of GDP by 2008 and 2009. We were on the path of implementing these particular targets, but the global financial crisis hit the Indian economy. There was a spillover effect because of the global financial crisis. As a result of this, corporate activity or manufacturing activity in case of Indian economy was affected. Now, whenever these kind of spillover effects are felt, which are large scale in nature, that is, economic activity on the whole gets disrupted, please follow this very carefully. One, the tax receipts of the government will come down. Not only income taxes, even the corporate taxes will get affected. Second, the employment creation will be affected. The demand for consumption in the market is expected to come down. Unemployment rates are going to increase. On the other hand, if you look at the government, the expenses of the government are going to increase. So on one side, receipts or incomes of the government are going to come down, expenditures are going to increase. So will you be able to meet these particular deficit targets? Absolutely no. That is a precise reason. After the global financial crisis took effect, Government of India post 2007 and 2008 had to forego these particular targets. And since then, we are trying to still achieve these particular targets. The target which has been or which was initially kept for 2008 and 2009 has been postponed now to 2023. That is based on the recommendations of N.K. Singh Committee on FRBM. But more importantly, what is another very important point which is discussed in this particular article? This article discusses a clause called as escape clause. Follow this very carefully. Under FRBM, there is a clause called as escape clause under section 4(2) of the Act. Now, the Kerala government is asking for the implementation of this particular escape clause because FRBM, as far as we have discussed from the perspective of the central government, but because of the recommendation of 12th Finance Commission, same concept of FRBM or fiscal responsibility has also been implemented across the states, where they are also supposed to meet the fiscal deficit target, or they are supposed to drag down the fiscal deficit of the states to 3% of gross state domestic product. But come back to the concept of escape clause here. What do you mean by escape clause? In certain situations, such as the current one, pandemic situation, there's a national calamity, there's a war, obviously you will see that the expenditure of the government is going to overshoot. That is, the expenditure will be very, very high. Revenues or the receipts will be comparatively lesser or will be reducing. In this particular situation, can you meet this particular, let's say, fiscal deficit target? It will not be possible at this point of a time. Hence, under FRBM, there's an inbuilt mechanism of escape clause, which basically allows the government to overshoot the expenditure or borrow heavily from the market. Let me repeat it. Under the escape clause, once it is triggered, that is, government uses the escape clause, it simply means government can expand its borrowings from the market. Let me give a simple example. Just imagine a situation for financial year 20 and 21. Let's say again, just hypothetical numbers. Government of India had kept a target of 3% of GDP in the form of fiscal deficit. All I'm saying is, government had decided, let's achieve a 3% of GDP in the form of fiscal deficit. But because of the pandemic, obviously the receipts, tax receipts or incomes are going to come down, expenditure is going to overshoot. Will you be able to meet this particular target? Unlikely. You will not be able to meet. In this particular situation, obviously you will have to increase your fiscal deficit. To what extent, that will be decided under the escape clause of FRBM. Under the escape clause of FRBM, the government is allowed to recalibrate or change its fiscal deficit by 50 basis points. That is, in simple terms, 0.5% of GDP. Just to put it in simple terms, if my target, again hypothetical numbers, if my target for financial year 21 fiscal deficit target was 3%, if the government triggers the escape clause, then it will be allowed to expand this particular fiscal deficit target from 3% to 3.5%, which will give government more legroom or will allow the government to borrow more from the market. So that is the whole concept or some of the very important points which have been discussed under this particular article. So based on this, let's look at certain questions here. Consider the following statements. The fiscal deficit of the government has been steadily increasing in the last decade. No, it has not been steadily increasing. Rather, government is trying to reduce it. Rather, understand this very carefully. Rather, government is trying to reduce it. It has kept certain targets, but many of the times a government will overshoot the targets. But that doesn't mean that FD has kept on steadily increasing over a period of time. Again, I'm referring to FD as a percentage of GDP here. Okay. Second, FRBM Act tries to instill the principle of intergenerational equity at the state and central level. I've already discussed this. FRBM is applicable at the state also, at the central level also. So yes, second statement is true. Option B is correct. Next, a descriptive question. Discuss the NK Singh Committee recommendations in 250 words. The next article is related to RRBs, Regional Rural Banks. Some of the very important points are, first, Government of India passed an act, and post the passage of the act, we started setting up of RRBs post 1975. Second, RRBs will have three stakeholders. That is, there are three very important stakeholders in case of RRBs. There is a stake of central government. That is, in simple terms, part of the ownership will be held by the central government. There is a state governments and there is a sponsoring bank. Now, how much of the ownership or stake will be held by individually all the three? Central government will hold 50% of the stake in the bank. State government will hold 15% of the stake in this particular bank, and sponsoring bank will hold 35% of the stake in the bank. So center 50%, state 15%, sponsoring bank 35%. Next, over a period of time, the RRBs have incurred huge amount of losses. Initially, we launched these particular banks in order to ensure that the credit facility or financing facility will be expanded even in rural areas, and we will promote the habit of savings in rural areas, and most importantly, mobilize these particular savings. In simple terms, we wanted to ensure that the regional rural banks will give loans to various stakeholders or various market participants in rural India, and will be able to collect the deposits, that is basically mobilize the deposits in rural India. With this objective, we launched the concept of RRBs. But over a period of time, these particular banks have suffered because of a huge amount of NPAs. As a result of this, the number of RRBs which came under financial pressure was very huge. Government of India has started the process of reconsolidation of these particular RRBs. Initially, In the last decade, the number of RRBs were very, very high, more than 190. As a result of the reconsolidation initiative taken by the government, the number of these particular RRBs has been gradually reduced to 56. And government last year has also announced that they want to reconsolidate or reduce these particular number of RRBs further. But apart from that, why these RRBs are very, very important? Please understand, these RRBs will play a very important role in order to ensure that some of the very important sectors in rural India will get access to institutional credit or bank credit in simple terms. The concept of a PSL, priority sector lending, in case of RRBs that is applicable is 75%. Whereas in case of commercial banks, the same PSL applicable will be 40%. So you can see that RRBs will play a very important role in ensuring the accessibility of institutional credit in case of rural stakeholders or rural borrowers in simple terms. Now, what has been given in this particular article? Since the rural banks or these RRBs are facing certain financial pressures because they are supposed to meet the requirement, let's say for example CRAR, that is a credit to risk weighted assets ratio or else capital adequacy ratio under Basel guidelines. What is the meaning of the capital adequacy ratio? Please follow this very carefully. Since the banks are giving loans in the market, there is a probability that they will face a certain losses. I'll repeat the statement. Banks are giving loans in the market. The loans might not come back to the bank. So there will be certain losses incurred by the bank. To absorb these kind of losses, they are supposed to meet certain capital requirements or have certain capital. The minimum amount of a capital that has to be maintained by these particular banks will be defined under the capital adequacy ratio. And the capital adequacy ratio for Indian banks will be decided by whom? Reserve Bank of India. So these particular banks are struggling to meet these kind of a capital requirements. Hence, Government of India has announced infusion of a capital of 1,340 crore rupees of recapitalization. Having said so, please understand, of this particular 1,340 crore rupees, half of it will come from the central government. That is 670 crores will come from the central government and the remaining will come from the sponsor banks. So this is the piece of information that has been provided in this particular article. Now based on this, let's have a look at question here. Consider the following statements about RRBs. Central government owns more than 51% of the stake in these particular banks. Wrong. Central government owns 50%. 15% will be owned by state governments and remaining 35% will be owned by the sponsor banks. PSL applicable for these particular banks is 40% in line with the commercial banks. Again wrong. 40% is for commercial banks, whereas a PSL applicable for RRBs is 75%. So right option will be option D. Both are false. Next question. Which of the following committees have recommended restructuring of RRBs? Regional rural banks. I have not discussed this. Just make a note of it. First, Basu committee. Yes, that has recommended restructuring of RRBs. Bhandara committee. Definitely yes. It is also very important with respect to restructuring of RRBs. Urjit Patel committee. It is more applicable for concept of inflation targeting. Malegam committee for microfinancial institutions. So first point, second point are correct. Right option will be option C. The next article is related to NRIs and G securities. In the last couple of years, a lot of reforms have been taken by both Government of India as well as RBI to attract investment into the financial market. One such investment which has been mentioned in this particular article is VRR, Voluntary Retention Route. Now another very important route has been introduced to attract the investments from NRIs into the market, specifically into the government securities. Now please understand this. This particular route which has been introduced by RBI is fully accessible route, FAR, fully accessible route. Under this particular FAR, RBI wants to attract investment from NRIs into the debt market, specifically into the government securities. What kind of securities will be opened up for investment through NRIs here? Basically, we have opened up securities of tenure 5 years, 10 years, and 30 years. That is, government will issue different type of securities with a different maturities. These particular G securities will have a short-term maturity as well as long-term maturity. Now, RBI, in order to attract investment of NRIs into G securities, has opened up long-term G securities with maturity of 5 years, 10 years and 30 years. These particular NRS can invest their money or income into these particular different types of securities in the market. Now, why this was done, that is more important for you to understand. Please understand, in recent times, because of the onset of the pandemic, certain volatility has been created in the financial market. And usually when this kind of a volatility will be created, uncertainty is created in the market, you will see that foreign portfolio investors will try to withdraw their investment. They will withdraw their investment and move out of the market. Why? Very simple reason. Whenever there is uncertainty or volatility in the market, no foreign investor would like to invest in a security or in an instrument which is in the foreign market. That is, we want to hold the investment in our home currency itself. Whereas an investor from USA will come into India, will invest in the Indian stock market. Their investments will be in rupee terms. Now, don't you think any kind of uncertainty or volatility will lead to fluctuation of a rupee value or their asset value? And when the value of their assets or investments will change, obviously they will also get affected. So they do not like this kind of uncertainty or volatility. So whenever you will see that uncertainty or volatility is created in the market, FPIs will start withdrawing their money. As a result of which, there will be certain shortage created to the supply of dollars in the market. Hence, again, volatility is created in the forex market. So understand this. There is a volatility in the stock market or the financial market. There is also volatility in the forex market. One of the ways which has been introduced now to address this particular situation is this particular route, fully accessible route. Understand this. This is one objective. Second objective, government from the last couple of years has been trying to list these particular G securities in global debt indices or global bond indices. In order to promote the inclusion of G securities or government securities in the global indices, the government has allowed the NRIs to invest in these particular G securities. So these are some of the reasons why this particular provision has been introduced. So please remember this. This is called as fully accessible route. Next, two articles related to WTO, World Trade Organization. One is in relation to peace clause and the second one is related to fisher bodies. Let me start with the first one. Under the concept of WTO, there is a concept of boxes. I'll focus on the most important box, that is amber box subsidies. Understand the concept here. Every country will provide subsidies for their producers. I'll focus the producers here, agriculture sector producers, that is farmers. Is it okay? So understand this. Every country will provide subsidies to their producers. Focus here, farmers. Now, these particular subsidies given one way will not create any kind of a market distortion. And in certain other situations, these kind of subsidies which are provided will create market distortion. Let me give a very simple example. Imagine to produce rice, government will provide certain inputs free of a cost. Just a hypothetical situation. To cultivate rice, there will be certain inputs required. Imagine a situation where government will provide all these particular inputs free of a cost. Now, when the inputs are available free of cost, don't you think cost of production of rice in India will be much lesser or substantially lesser compared to many other developing countries or trading partners? So we will end up exporting rice to these particular trading partners. And since cost of production in India is very less, this rice cultivation will be very competitive compared to the trading partners. So other countries' farmers will get affected. The markets in other countries will also get affected. So in order to ensure that the distortion or trade distortion created is very low, we have created a concept of subsidy boxes. The most important box is an amber box subsidy, under which basically we will discuss the concept of the limitation on the subsidies. That is, under the concept of the agriculture subsidies under WTO, the countries are not supposed to provide the aggregate measure of a support. In simple terms, the agriculture subsidies should not cross more than 10% of their total production value. I'll repeat the statement. Under the concept of a WTO, that is specifically under one of the agreements, agreement on agriculture, the member countries are not supposed to provide the agriculture subsidy more than 10% of the value of the production. And whenever a country crosses more than 10% of the value of the production, the other trading partners can simply drag this particular country to WTO and file a case. This particular provision was opposed by many of the developing countries, including India. That is a precise reason in one of the conferences, that is a 2013 Bali conference, there is an inclusion called as peace clause that has been invoked by the government very recently. Now, what is this idea of a peace clause? When I said that developing countries were opposed to this particular concept of a limitation on agriculture support, the other countries basically gave a leeway or provided a concept called as a peace clause, wherein a member country could cross the threshold level of 10% support for the agriculture sector. But if they invoke this particular peace clause, no other country or other trading partners, they cannot file a complaint against this particular country. And the government of India stated that for 2018 and 2019, the total value of rice production for India was around $43 billion, and the support that was given to this particular sector was more than $5 billion. So in simple terms, the support or the subsidies given will be around 11.4% of the total value of production. Obviously, India has crossed this particular 10% limitation. Other trading partners can file a case against India. So to prevent this particular situation, the government of India has invoked a peace clause, and other member countries will have to adhere to this particular peace clause now. This is one side of the article. Next, there is another article, that is basically fisher bodies call for a halt to WTO talk. Understand this, under WTO, there is one discussion related to limiting subsidies given to fisheries. That is, how much subsidies are given to fisheries, there should be a limitation on it. Now, why there should be a limitation? WTO member countries are worried about over exploitation of the fishing. That is, basically they use a term IUU, illegal unreported fishing. Now, whenever this kind of an unregulated, illegal, unreported fishing will go on, obviously it will have an impact on the population of fishes. And China is considered to be the main culprit related to this. As a result of this particular fishing, in case of China, China is considered to be the major exporter of fish to the global market. In case of India, India also features in the top 10 exporters of fish. The argument of government of India from the last decade itself has been that these particular limitation or prohibition on subsidies of fishing should not be limited to the fishing done within the territorial waters. That has been one. Second, the argument has been that whatever subsidies we are giving to our fishers is very small amount of subsidy. So citing this, government of India has been opposed to this kind of a prohibition to be imposed under WTO on fishery subsidy. But nevertheless, during this particular pandemic, some of the member countries have gone ahead and have started deliberating with relation to the fishery subsidies. And fisher bodies in India have called for the halt on these particular WTO talks. This is the gist of the article given here. So these are the various important articles as well as the questions related to these particular articles for this time period. Thank you. Have a good day.